So Elden Ring comes out in 3 months, which means one thing, I can't play it. And in the meantime, I've decided to play as many challenging games as I can, with the only criteria being they can't be FromSoft games. And today I've gone with Shinobi for the PS2. Released in 2002 by Sega, Shinobi is actually part of a much bigger franchise that started way back in 1987, and this is the first in the series to venture into the world of 3D games. Now, gonna be honest, I instantly assumed this was a Ninja Gaiden ripoff. However, this series started a year before Ninja Gaiden, and as far as I'm aware, it was the first to make the leap into 3D, releasing 2 years before Ninja Gaiden 2004. Oh, and I'm not trying to insinuate that Ninja Gaiden was a ripoff, because from what I read, the 1980s just spawned dozens of ninja games. Now, what drew me to this installment in particular was that, like Ninja Gaiden, the series is infamous for its difficulty, but this game is apparently hard even among the already hard Shinobi games, so it seemed like something worth looking at. So anyway, without further ado, let's see how difficult this game really is. So the story follows Hotsuma, a young shinobi who's just killed his brother and in turn become the leader of his clan. He also inherits a demon sword called Akajiki, which will have massive implications on both the story and the gameplay. The game then cuts to 5 years later and we learn someone's released an evil sorcerer called Hiroko, who's wrecked Tokyo by summoning a giant palace, killed and resurrected your entire clan as evil zombies, and released monsters called Hellspawn. It's then your job to make your way to the final showdown with Hiroko while killing your former clansmen, and you also have to take down 4 Hellspawn lords who now control the monsters destroying Japan. Now, I'll admit the story is much better than the other games I've played so far. On the surface, it just seems like a generic revenge story, but it does have enough twists to make it fairly engaging. Like, for instance, you find out it was your friend who released Hiroko since she was angry that you killed your brother all those years ago. It's also revealed that you essentially did Hiroko's plan for him. Like, everything you did helped him and made everything worse, creating the very circumstances you were trying to prevent, until you kill him at the end anyway. My only real gripe with the story is it doesn't have much impact. You don't really know anything about the people you're killing, and normally that wouldn't bother me, but you literally spend the whole game murdering your former masters, your best friend, and your brother twice. I feel like a game where you're killing everybody you've ever known, it should have a bit more impact. So Shinobi has one of the most unique combat mechanics I've ever seen in a game. Without it, it's still a very well made, albeit generic ninja game, but with it, it becomes something completely different. The combat itself is sort of what you'd expect from a ninja game. It's fast paced and fun, and the premise is very simple. To progress, you either kill every enemy in the area or destroy all the floating idols located around the place, and that's it. Although I should mention that achieving these objectives is often much easier said than done, because this game becomes relentlessly difficult very early on. In terms of combat, you obviously have your trusty cursed demon samurai sword, and the game is even nice enough to provide a lock-on feature. You also have a stealth dash to move faster, and combining this with your double jump will allow you to stay airborne for extended periods while you kill enemies. You also have kunai that can stun enemies and even knock flying enemies out of the sky, and 3 types of ninjutsu scrolls with various abilities. The first one is a giant explosion, which is really helpful for when you become overwhelmed. The second allows you to shoot moon-shaped projectiles, and the final one is great for bosses as it allows for temporary invincibility and a speed boost. Although this game's most interesting feature is something entirely unique. See, the first stage plays out normally, but in stage 2 we learn that Akajiki is a cursed demon blade, and now it's active it will eat the soul of its user, i.e. you. This means from now on you have to constantly kill enemies to keep Akajiki fed, and if you don't, you'll die. Now this creates a unique dilemma for players, because each stage has 2 checkpoints, one at the start and one when you reach the boss, and that's it. Should you die before you reach the end, you're doing the whole thing all over again. And considering how punishingly hard these stages get, you'll be doing them over and over. And to make life easier, you'll probably start avoiding enemies when the game lets you. However, by doing this, you're not killing as much, meaning Akajiki will kill you. And even if you don't die directly from the sword, all the toughest enemies are always at the end of levels, so you'll arrive, have no health, and get killed immediately. The game basically says, well, you can skip this section, but if you die later on, then it's your fault. Now I should mention this isn't all bad, because in return for your soul, the game gives you access to the Tate system. This basically means if you kill enemies in rapid succession, you'll receive massive damage buffs, to the point where everything can be killed in one hit. The only trade-off is that the buff only lasts about 5 seconds at most, so when you have it you need to be quick. Oftentimes you'll have smaller enemies around a giant one, and it's basically the game's way of telling you, kill all the smaller ones first, get the buff and kill the big one in a single attack. So the way the areas work in this game is you have 8 stages overall, each stage will have 2 levels, and you will notice they use a lot of repeated scenery in each. This isn't entirely bad because the combat more than compensates, but some areas do look very samey, making it very easy to get lost, and in a game where hanging around too long will literally get you killed, it's not very helpful. These stages also come complete with environmental hazards like lasers, poison and lava, which I never found to be that deadly. Even lava isn't a one-shot in this for some reason. The only one which is kind of annoying are these spider webs on stage 3B, simply because of the sound Hotsuma makes when he steps on them. No, the real challenge comes when platforming is introduced because it is brutal. I'd go as far as saying you'll die far more to falling than the actual enemies. The first 4 stages are fine, but when stage 5 hits, oh my god. Stage 5A is seared into my memory. It takes place in a flooded city with no floor, so you have to run on the walls the whole time. Thankfully you can run on walls forever, but that doesn't make it any easier. You just fall into the water all the time, and unlike lava, this kills you instantly. It should also be noted that due to the lack of checkpoints, platforming becomes a far more stressful ordeal than it realistically should be. I knew that if I fell, I'd have to start all over again. This gave me a habit of panicking when I thought I was going to fall, which in turn made me fall anyway. To put in perspective just how hard 5A is, when I finally did it, it took me 6 minutes to reach the boss, but I'd been trying for over an hour. Oh, and an honourable mention to stage 8A for having platforming so rage-inducing I nearly deleted the game. So the bosses in the game consist of your former friends, the 4 Hellspawn lords who work for Hiroko, and a possessed military helicopter. Interestingly enough, the helicopter shows up twice, which I found weird because it's just a helicopter. If it was a human, I'd understand, but it comes back later just on fire. So did it seek revenge on Hotsuma? I really have no idea. Now what's cool about the boss fights is not only are they really good, but just like the normal enemies you can use the Tate system against them. In all the boss fights, standard enemies will spawn, give you a chance to charge Akajiki, and you can charge it to the point where you can one-shot them.
Rest in peace.
Now admittedly it's much easier said than done to actually pull this off, because all the bosses will have different elements that make it so you can't just stroll in and kill them in one hit. For example, you can't go anywhere near the stage 6A boss, because he'll instantly lay you out with relentless attacks. So you have to stay on the walls the whole fight, charge up your sword and jump behind him. Other examples include this moth lady who flies above the arena so you have to jump at her, a guy with a shield who's basically Sundowner from Metal Gear Rising, and a guy who can teleport, making it hard to reach him before your Tate burns out. However, the best example of this is when you fight a living statue thing, because you can't even damage him unless Akajiki is charged to a purplish colour. Also, all of his attacks will knock you into water which kills you instantly, and he's located slightly away from the arena but not quite enough to notice, so you either miss him or fall off the platform. I did one-shot him though, so that was cool. You'll notice this section is called The Problem, because I only have one real complaint, the final boss. Now, I can respect what they were doing here, because the final boss is essentially a combination of everything you've dealt with so far, kinda like Glock Saint Ishin at the end of Sekiro. So I guess the idea was to use everything you've learned up until that point to beat him, but the problem is what they've done is essentially make the boss impossible to actually hit. Also, this fight starts with a 3-minute section where you can't damage him anyway. It's not very hard, but it just doesn't need to be there. I should also mention that the basic enemies you need to charge Akajiki are far too capable for a boss this hard. Not only are their hitboxes fucked, but they shoot fireballs at you, stun on contact, and blow up. And there's loads of them on screen, so it's very hard to avoid being killed, especially when your attention is off the boss. However, what makes this fight horrid is that, as stated, you cannot hit him. Firstly, he loves to teleport, so even if the stars align and you manage a fully charged Tate, he'll probably be too far away and you'll time out. And if he isn't, he'll either block you or he'll be in the middle of attacking, and while doing so, he's invincible. The tiny windows of opportunity make this fight incredibly unfair, and the whole thing is pretty much based on how lucky you are and what mood the boss is in. And honestly, it has a big impact on the game's replay value, because you can unlock higher difficulties, but when you know this is waiting for you, and even on normal he's damn near impossible. Overall, Shinobi is a fantastic game, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's a fan of the FromSoft games, or just anyone who's a fan of action games in general. Although if you do play it, be prepared for a hell of a time with that final boss because he's an absolute monster. But other than that, this game is a lot of fun and well worth playing. I should also mention that providing you can beat the final boss, this game has a lot of replay value. You can unlock higher difficulties like I mentioned, but even new characters like your brother and the original Shinobi character, Joe Masashi. And these aren't just reskins, they actually play differently. For example, your brother does double damage but is drained much faster by Akajiki, and Joe isn't affected by Akajiki at all, but his kunai won't stun enemies. As for a ranking, Shinobi is the hardest game I've ever played, if we're counting that incredibly unfair final boss, which I guess I have to because it's still part of the game despite being bullshit. Without him, I'd still rank it very, very high, but with him, I'd have to rank it even above Sekiro. And again, this is just my personal struggle, not anything official. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.